So welcome everybody to another level up. Today we'll be talking about part 2 on basic ego strategy. Now I'll put a link to my part 1 below, and part 1 was for complete beginners, and this one is basically for people who have still beginner, of course, but what happens after you played a few games and everything. And again, I'll preface that I'm not a professional or anything like that, but here's the thing: I rediscovered the game again after a few years, and I'm relearning all the same. I'm making the same mistakes. I'm learning all the basic strategies again, and by basically going to having these growing pains and giving you these tips I have here, it will save you the time of having to go through the same mistakes and then discovering the solutions. So basically, today we have 4 tips, and let's get right to it. Now, the first tip of the day is basically what happens after you learn the basic strategies of ego. Now, basic strategy of ego is that you always remember that the bottom half is your friend, all right, the 4 corners especially, and so the first thing you always focus on is, I gotta defend my foundation. And what I found myself, example, I'm white, found myself doing was that usually this will happen, and I would come here, and he would come here, and I would start to think, I need to defend my foundation, and he goes here, and then white just keeps white just keeps extending, thinking, what a mistake black is making. I'm getting all these juicy points at the bottom half here, but actually it's bad for me, because here's the thing: long term, I've just created a huge problem for myself. All right, why is that? Because what will happen is, let's say that this whole part is black up to here, all right, just to give an example. Now I don't have enough right here, but let's just say this whole part up to here is black, this whole part up to here is white. What happens is that in terms of the game, any point that I expand now for this whole section here hits a black wall, all right, and that's really bad, because remember, in the mid or late game, all right, the corners will be basically settled, and what you're fighting over is the middle path that will break the ties. And in the terms of military strategy, imagine that basically black has a supply line that stretches all the way into your territory, and for you, your supply line is, although you have a supply line, is cut off for any support in the middle. So you always want to remember, the foundations are really important, all right, but don't forget about the middle. Always have some route leading out. Example, if this is going this way, you might want to maybe cut off to here. At least then you can have a way out, or maybe you can extend further, so that at least you can have some way to stop black's influence from stretching towards the whole of the middle of the board. So that's the first strategy. Is always remember to protect your middle. Also, the foundation is important. All right, the lower half is important, but remember, the middle is also very important to winning the game in the end. Number 2, all right, now number 2 is a thing that you will start to notice in terms, again, this is like a poker thing, where you have to look at your opponent and see what gauge or skill level he is. And the simple lesson is avoid close fights. What will happen is, usually, example, that would be here, and let's say I'm white again, he would come here, and then I would start here. And what you notice is that every time how I respond is basically very close fights. Basically it's on the next point, adjacent point to his. And here's the simple fact of it: usually when you have very close fights like this, the person with the highest skill always wins, because he can read further, he knows when to stop defending, he knows when to attack. So as a beginner, if you know that your opponent you're playing, you have the advantage, by all means carry on with the close fight. But if you're not sure, usually it's a much better point to just avoid a fight and just look to the future, because here's the thing: no matter how good he is, he can't stop you from all these points on the board. There's 360 points. Example, instead of trying to stop him here or having a close fight, you can just put it here, and if he tries to extend, he tries to cut you off. Okay, I see how big of a difference that is. That because let's say I was not too confident on my skill, even if he starts to cut me off, something like that, I mean, let's say it come to something like this and he cuts me off, alright, I still have this whole section that I have influence to, alright. So yeah, avoid close fights if you're not sure of your skill. Again, just like the first lesson I had in my first video, look at your opponent's skill. Alright, next one, avoid clusters. I learned this from a done player I met recently, and he taught me a very simple lesson. That example, what I kept doing every time was something along the lines of situations like that, where I would always just connect it here. And that's, I mean, like he said, this is not always bad. This is again a game with 1 billion over moves. That's usually never a situation where you can say it's never good. But you know what happens is, you look at this situation, if you have a lot of times where you find yourself in little clusters like that, it doesn't do anything for your shape. Instead, look at the difference if I just extended that here. Now white has an issue. He's either gonna be isolated here, or if he starts defending here, he has a problem that this part now is, you see, this influence here is all black. So just look at that one little move made all the difference. So that's the third tip: avoid clusters. You know, avoid little clusters that do nothing for you. Especially like he always told me, like, if you see this little shape here, try to avoid it. It's not to say it's always bad, but usually the case is there's a better move there. And that goes into the last tip of the day. Basically, is look to your shape. Like I said just now, you know, what happens is that you usually will have a situation like that, and let's say you have extended here and he cuts in. Alright, look to your shape. Example, if you're like me, you're more of a defensive player by nature, alright, you know, let's say he's a far better skilled person than you. If I was to fight him here, what happens, usually he will cut me off here, or either I would die because he will cut me to the corner. Like for me, if I feel he's a better player and by nature I'm a defensive player, instead there's nothing wrong with then extending your control to something like that. Alright, although yes, you can try to save the stone here, but by looking at the shape, because I'm a defensive player, now look, I have this entire section here for me. Instead of, if I got really scared and I started doing this, you know, then as a better player he'll probably kill me here. But so look to your shape and look to your future ideas and what kind of player you are, and then set your shape according to that. So basically that's the 4 tips for the day. 1, remember, protect your middle. Alright, always defend, get a good foundation, but always remember to always also settle your middle. Avoid close fights unless you're sure you have a huge advantage in skill, because remember, whoever who can read further always wins usually in a close fight. Number 3, avoid little clusters. Alright, they usually don't do anything for you. Remember, this game is all about future planning and extending your influence and defending at the same time. And the last one, always look to your shape. This comes to your personality. Are you a defensive player? Are you an aggressive player? And then play to your strengths of the shape, you know, that keeps you ahead. So basically those are the 4 tips for the day. Thank you very much. Till next word.